I really appreciate everybody making the time to join us this evening. Really excited to be able to present the three speakers that we have with regards to the benefits of buffers. Spent 18 years as a strength coach myself, working in the collegiate environment, and it was something that I'd kind of heard about a little bit off the cuff, and as a track athlete, going way back, but then never really came back up again. And so this evening, we're really excited to be able to bring three presenters forward that cover the nutrition space, the athletic training space, and then the strength and conditioning sports performance space. So just a little bit of background, the three presenters, the first one we're going to start off with is Brittany Bearden. She's the consulting sports dietitian for the Dallas Mavericks, the FC Dallas, and the Dallas Wings. Really excited to have her here. And with that, Brittany, if you want to take it and run with it.
Perfect. Thanks, Patrick. Welcome, everyone. I am the first presenter kicking this presentation off with buffers. So like Patrick said, I'm a sports dietitian in Dallas, Texas. I currently consult with the Dallas Mavericks, FC Dallas, and the Dallas Wings. Prior to this, I had worked at several colleges, and so worked in the collegiate setting for a while and now work with a few professional teams. So tonight I'll be starting off the presentation, and I'll just kind of get into the how buffers work in the body, and then talk specifically about beta-alanine and sodium bicarbonate. So, but before I do that, I would be a really bad dietitian if I didn't start off talking about nutrition. So with all athletes, depending on the level that you work at or whatever level athletes that you work with, nutrition is always going to be important. And so there's always several things that we do want to consider with an athlete's nutrition before we even look into supplementation. And so moving on to the next slide, when we kind of look at different components that play into that, these are just a few things that I think are pretty crucial when it comes to athlete's nutrition. So first and foremost, we do want to look at that energy balance. So we want to ensure that the athletes, that their energy intake is matching their energy expenditure. And this is going to be periodized around their training and around their competition. So that's going to look different throughout the year. But we really do want to make sure we're having that balance. Of course, there will be times where the athlete will have a weight goal. So they're trying to gain weight, lose weight. So then, of course, we do want the energy intake to be less than the expenditure or greater than the expenditure, depending on the goal. But if we don't have those weight goals, we want to make sure that we're matching that energy expenditure of the training. If we're consistently under fueling, whether that be intentionally or not, we can get into some issues from the health perspective and athletic performance perspective. So we can be at risk for RAD-S, the relative energy deficiency in sport. So that can give us lower bone mineral density, that can give us an increased risk of injury, increased fatigue, all of which is going to decrease athletic performance. So we just want to make sure, first and foremost, that they're eating appropriately for that. Can you go back on the next slide? So, and then when we look at that, the overall intake, we of course can look at where that energy is coming from. So we want to make sure that the energy is distributed appropriately between the macronutrients. It's timed well around training, competition, so that we're consistently fueling and recovering properly. And then we can look at supplementation, hydration, sleep. All of those are going to be important aspects as well. We can look at too, just we want to maximize that microbiome and immunity. So the majority of the immune system is located in the gut microbiome. And so that's just an important piece too, to just do everything that we can from nutrition and lifestyle factors to help just improve that overall health and immunity. And so from the diet perspective, one thing that we can do is make sure we're getting plenty of fiber-rich foods. So getting some plant diversity in there and choosing fiber from food is going to be a much better approach than choosing fiber from supplements or very high fiber bars. We want to try to do everything that we can from the food perspective on that to really get in good fiber-rich foods there to help promote that microbiome, to help promote a strong immune system. And then we do want to have athletes that have healthy relationships with food. You know, there's always that spectrum of, and again, whether it's intentional or not, of disordered eating patterns. You know, we have athletes that potentially have that, and then all the way to clinical eating disorders. So not every athlete struggles with this, but we do just want to, if we have athletes with that, just help them, you know, have that healthy relationship with food, because if they don't, that's going to affect everything else. And then of course, every athlete has individual goals, individual schedules, and that's going to change too based on the time of the year. Any health medical concerns that the athlete has, that will also impact their individual nutrition. So these are just a few of the things that we do want to make sure the athlete is doing from a foundation standpoint with nutrition, and then implement this into those daily habits. And so we can go on to the next slide to kind of just talk about, again, just those daily things that we want to make sure that we're doing, basic things that hopefully athletes are doing, but they're not always doing those things. So again, having a diet that's going to promote adequate calories, adequate micro and micronutrients, proper hydration, and they're eating appropriately throughout the day. So unfortunately, though, sometimes athletes are underfueling. Maybe they're skipping meals. The calories that they are eating maybe aren't from the best sources. So a lot of times we don't have high intakes of fruits and vegetables. They're coming from lower nutrient foods. And a lot of times too, I've noticed, especially on the college level, but this can happen on any level, is there's not a great distribution of nutrients throughout the day. They don't eat much throughout the day. And then at night, that's whenever they eat the majority of their calories. So just trying to, again, have those daily habits of strong nutrition habits. So once we have done that and we have athletes that have strong nutrition habits, then we can look at those supplements that can potentially help the athlete. So with supplements, as we know, in dietary supplements, there are a wide range of supplements out there, and there's a million out there. And the supplement industry can be pretty sketchy. So we just want to be wise with any kind of supplement protocols that we develop, whether it's something we provide to the athlete or that we're educating the athlete on. And there's kind of two broad supplement categories that how I kind of view them, and we can skip over to the next slide. Is those kind of like health and wellness supplements. So that's going to be like your multivitamin, vitamin D, iron, omega-3 fatty acids, kind of just those ones that promote just overall health and wellness. Now, some of these can have an indirect athletic performance benefit. So for example, if we have an athlete that is vitamin D deficient and they supplement with vitamin D and they get their levels to a healthy range, that can help them in their athletic performance just because they were deficient before. So there are times that those health and wellness ones do more than just provide overall good health and wellness. They can have that indirect athletic performance benefit, but those are going to be, again, more of those kind of your vitamins and minerals. And then when we get to kind of that enhancing athletic performance supplements, those are going to be like your pre-workout supplements, your post-workout supplements, anything really that is promising an increase in speed, power, endurance, any of those kind of things. So, and even in that category, there are, as we know, a million. So we're looking tonight at buffers. And so with that, the International Olympic Committee recognizes 5 supplements with good to strong evidence of providing athletic performance benefits. And those 5 are caffeine, creatine, nitrate, beta-alanine, and sodium bicarbonate. So we're looking again specifically at buffers. So that's going to be the beta-alanine and the sodium bicarbonate. So I'm getting into now the buffers. So buffers are really important in the body, and there are lots of different types of buffers. And buffers are used to maintain a stable pH in solution. And so we're not going to get into every single buffer system, but there are some in the cell and there are some out of the cell. And so the body does a pretty good job of, in a healthy, normal person, the body maintains blood pH very stable. So arterial blood pH is about 7.4, and it stays right about there. It can range from about 7.35 to 7.45 kind of thing. It does a really good job of keeping it right there. And just as a reminder, with pH, it's tightly related to hydrogen ion concentration. So if we have an increase in hydrogen ion concentration, we have a decrease in pH, making that more acidic. On the flip side, if we have a decrease in hydrogen ion concentration, we have an increase in pH, making that more basic or alkaline. And so, again, the body controls this very well. There are certain situations where the pH can be lower or higher than it needs to be. We're really going to focus on that exercise-induced acidosis, so where the pH is going lower because hydrogen ions are increasing. And the problem with exercise-induced acidosis is that can contribute to muscle fatigue. So a few, just again, before we get into beta-alanine and sodium bicarbonate, just a few things on kind of the process of what happens before we need to use those. So hydrogen ions is produced whenever we have muscles contracting during exercise. And hydrogen ions can be produced from a couple different things, including lactic acid and lactate production, ATP breakdown, and also carbon dioxide and carbonic acid production. So we can get these hydrogen ions from a couple of different places, basically. And the amount of hydrogen ions that are produced varies on a couple of things. So the amount that's produced during exercise is going to be dependent on the exercise intensity, the amount of muscle mass that's involved in the exercise, and then also like the duration of the work. So those are going to be some of those influencing factors of how much hydrogen ions we have produced. And the reason that these hydrogen ions are problematic in exercise is because they can attach to different molecules, and they can change the shape and size of these molecules, which can change the function. So when we look at enzymes, for example, those are one of those molecules that can change the function of. Enzymes, as we know, are important in metabolic reactions. So in exercise, these enzymes, if the functions are changed, that can inhibit anaerobic and aerobic ATP production. So that's going to decrease the ability of the muscle to produce that ATP, which is problematic in exercise. And then also these hydrogen ions can also compete with calcium ions for binding sites on troponin. So it can hinder the muscle contractility. So again, another issue with exercise. So that's a little bit of why those hydrogen ions are problematic in exercise. So when we look at how we can combat these hydrogen ions that are being produced in exercise, that's where those buffers come into play. So we'll start with the intracellular buffer of beta-alanine. And beta-alanine is a non-essential amino acid, and it is a component of carnosine. And so we can flip over to that next slide to kind of see that chemical structure of carnosine. So carnosine is a dipeptide that's made up again of the beta-alanine and L-histidine. So both of those are amino acids. We have carnosine. And carnosine is found in the cytosol of skeletal muscles. And it's especially concentrated in fast twitch muscle fibers. So we'll see a higher concentration of carnosine in sprinters than you will in marathon runners. And generally, carnosine, it's estimated that carnosine typically contributes about 7% of total intracellular buffering capacity. But some studies have shown that it can be increased to as much as 15% with beta-alanine supplementation. So we want to increase carnosine in the muscle to help with that buffering capacity. And since it's made up of beta-alanine and L-histidine, carnosine's not really ideal to supplement with. And then L-histidine is pretty abundant in muscle cells. And so beta-alanine is what we want to supplement with to help increase those the carnosine formation. And because of that, beta-alanine is considered the rate limiting amino acid for carnosine formation. So beta-alanine supplementation to increase carnosine to increase buffering inside the cell. For this, we want about 3 to 6 grams a day, or about 65 milligrams per kilogram of body mass, if you want to kind of break it down that way. We can see some side effects with this. So some will experience like a tingling sensation on the skin. That usually subsides within like 60 to 90 minutes after taking it. Everyone experiences different side effects with supplements like this. So not everyone's going to experience this, but some may experience it to a higher degree. A couple of things we can do to combat that side effect is you can break up that dose and have that a couple times throughout the day. So you can do 0.8 to 1.6 grams every 3 to 4 hours. And so you're just breaking that dose and having that a couple times throughout the day as opposed to having it kind of all at once kind of thing. There's also slow releasing supplements available on the market now. So that can also be one way to do it now. But then one study showed with several weeks of supplementation of beta-alanine that there was a 40 to 50% increase in muscle carnosine after that beta-alanine supplementation. So it can be beneficial again to help with that intercellular buffering capacity. And then we move into the extracellular space with sodium bicarbonate. and sodium bicarbonate is baking soda. So baking soda, you probably have sodium bicarbonate at your house. And we're going to talk a little bit about how it can be used in the medical space, and then also for athletic performance. So in the medical space, there's several different things that can happen, again, with whenever the pH gets, whenever the acid balance base is off. And that can happen, certain health conditions can cause that, or certain diseases can lead to metabolic acidosis. And so a couple of different things can cause that, one of which is chronic kidney disease. So with chronic kidney disease, as the renal function declines, the kidneys lose the capacity to synthesize ammonia and excrete those hydrogen ions. So since it has a harder time excreting those hydrogen ions, again, those hydrogen ions are building up. So then that metabolic acidosis can happen. And as that happens, the renal function gets even worse. So it's kind of like that cyclical thing that can happen. Sodium bicarbonate can be used in that situation. You'd always want to do it under the care of a physician, but that can be something that can be used in that situation. With diabetic ketoacidosis and long-term starvation, basically they happen because of different things, but with either of those, you're having ketones in the blood because of excess fat metabolism. So with that ketones in the blood is raising, it's causing acidosis in the blood. And so again, another situation where it could be used to help with that. But again, you'd always want to do it. It's always underneath the care of a physician, that kind of thing. But those are situations where we can have that metabolic acidosis, where that acid balance base is off. And then also with acid reflux, so you can use like antacids. So there's a couple different kinds on the market, and all of them do have different ingredients in them. They don't all have the sodium bicarbonate, but like Alka-Seltzer, for example, does. That has sodium bicarbonate in it. And so that can help just neutralize the acidity of the stomach acid that's coming up. And those acid refluxes, or the antacids, can typically provide pretty quick relief. It just may not last very long. So because of that, sometimes they'll recommend to take several doses throughout the day. And just one kind of thing to be aware of that, depending on the population that's taking it, sodium bicarbonate does contain sodium. So depending on how much you're taking of that, that's going to be increasing the sodium content. So if we have anyone on a sodium restricted diet, so potentially anyone with high blood pressure or congestive heart failure, or different scenarios like that where they need to be aware of their sodium consumption, that would just be one thing they need to be aware of just how much they're consuming and how much sodium they're getting. And then when we look at with athletic performance, so really what that's going to do, again, it's in the extracellular space, so that's going to help increase the transport of lactate and hydrogen ions out of those muscle fibers. So as it does that, it's going to decrease the interference of those hydrogen ions on ATP production and on the muscle contractile process. So if we're hindering that, or if we're decreasing the hindrance, the goal is to limit muscle fatigue so that exercise can continue at the intensity that the athlete is trying to do. And this is going to be most beneficial for sporting events that do rely heavily on that anaerobic glycolysis. Okay, and so there's certain sports that, again, are going to have a higher risk of getting into this acid-base imbalance. So generally, again, kind of a rule of thumb is any kind of event that's lasting 1 to 8 minutes kind of thing. So a lot of swimming, rowing, running, cycling events, those kind of thing. It can still be beneficial for team sport because, of course, there are, high intensity bursts in games and in team sport. So that can still be beneficial in those scenarios. But it's really, again, going to be during those times that we're having mostly anaerobic glycolysis happening. So with this, the dose is going to be about 0.3 grams per kilogram of body mass with that. We would take it generally about an hour or two before the activity. However, we can have side effects whenever we take it orally. So just some GI distress can happen. So whether that's stomach pain, nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, there can be a range there with what athletes experience. So if that happens, there's a few things we want to be aware of with that. We, of course, would want to, if the first time that we're trying anything like this, we want to make sure that we're doing it slowly and not before a game. We'd want to do it in training. And there's also a few other things that we can do to try to help with that. You can either break up again, that dose into smaller amounts throughout the day and do it a couple of days before the event, or you can take that same amount over a longer period of time beyond the 1 to 2 hours kind of thing. You can also try to take it with a small carbohydrate-based meal. That can also help a little bit too with that GI distress. So with either of these, again, the buffering capacity, it's kind of just in different places of the cell, but the goal is to help decrease or combat those hydrogen ions that are being produced. And again, those hydrogen ions are getting produced more in those higher intensity exercises and events. So from that, that's just kind of a little bit of an explanation of how those work. So now I'm going to pass it on to Colin Francis, who's just going to continue the presentation and take it from here. And Colin, I'll let you kind of give more of your introduction, but Colin with the Baltimore Ravens.
If I could jump in real quick, we got a question in the Q&A for Brittany already, and I think this one's important. With sodium bicarbonate being an electrolyte and with beta-alanine being an amino acid, which is legal for the NCAA space, like for college athletics?
So they're both legal in terms of if it's neither is a banned substance. Like they're both legal to take. But with supplements, again, you just want to make sure that's where the third-party testing comes in, because you could have, like, if you just took a beta-alanine or just took sodium bicarbonate, but if it's not third-party tested, you just can't 100% ensure that there's nothing else in that product. So both legal, just make sure you get a third-party tested product.
That's great, thanks. And keep the questions coming in that little Q&A box down at the bottom. Colin, sorry to jump in, buddy. It's all you.
Not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. Thank you. Thank you, Brittany, for an amazing lesson on the nutritional aspects of buffers. I was fortunate enough to work with her at Indiana University. She's honestly one of the best in the field. My name is Colin Francis. I'm an assistant athletic trainer at the Baltimore Ravens. I really appreciate you guys joining us tonight, especially the night of the big game. But I'm sure we all have it on in the background. I've been an athletic trainer for the last 10 years with 3 NFL teams, a handful of different colleges, and I started a nonprofit organization, the Baltimore Area Sports Health Initiative. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about were 2 articles I found that I think back up the general ideas of my content. The first article from 2015, the author was looking to develop a training load measure for all teams, regardless of gender, level, or budget. There was a pro basketball measure out there, but nothing else. So they created a tool for futsal, which was based on comparing training loads to RPE results. The second article is a little bit older, from 1977, but this article used blood chemistry to study fatigue in athletics. So they had found a scientific basis for their conclusion, which was that performance level is equal to the level of fitness of the athlete minus the total fatigue of the athlete. All of us athletic trainers know that prevention is a key domain of athletic training. I think it's one of the most important. To understand why, you need to understand what we're trying to prevent. The first is inflammation, and it's the body's oldest trick in the book as its natural reaction to any irritant it faces. So old, they even found it in the 1st century AD. They discovered the 4 signs of inflammation. Those are heat, pain, swelling, and redness. Later on, loss of function was added to make the 5 cardinal signs of inflammation. Those signs, matched with the patient's symptoms, are what dictate the treatment parameters. Some of the common tools we use to fight inflammation, first are NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. There's a list here that'll come up. Common drugs we use are Celebrex, Indocin, naproxen. So plenty of options. I always say drugs work, and NSAIDs are great for our athletes. The Rice principles are still pretty accurate for most injuries. First, rest. Stay off the affected limb. Don't continue to irritate it more. The NFL is partnered with Sleep Number, so we are also able to make sure our guys get better sleep, which is huge while recovering from injury. Ice. Icing the injury decreases inflammation, and it has an analgesic effect. Compressing the injury so no swelling can form is a great tool, but it's also now used for recovery a lot as well. Elevating the injury above the heart aids in venous and lymphatic drainage. But the number one tool we benefit from at my level is the pro athlete mentality. These guys play through so much, and they never let inflammation be an excuse for being out of an activity. Another thing we try to avoid is fatigue, whether it's muscle fatigue, the inability to produce a maximum contraction due to prolonged exertion, or physiological fatigue, which is the decrease in the capacity of the neuromuscular system to carry out its functions. Psychological fatigue kicks in as well, and that's basically the mind's need for rest. Of course, our athletes don't come in saying, hey, I'm fatigued. They come in and say, man, Colin, I can't lift. I'm tired, spent, worked, on E, exhausted, gassed, drained, tired, worn out, beat. The list goes on and on. And those are all code words that we listen to kind of gauge how the athletes are feeling that day. Exercise intensity, we keep going back. Exercise intensity has an influence on muscle soreness. So muscles absorb energy in order to regulate and control limb movement. If there is an increased intensity of the movement, there's also an increase in the workload and an increase in energy it takes to control the limb. More energy leads to overstimulation of the muscle. Overstimulated or fatigued muscles take in less energy than before. That decrease in the energy of the muscle contraction, the energy deficit, is when injury can occur. So there's the connection between intensity, potential injury, all through fatigue. One of the most common things we treat is muscle soreness. The enemy of athletes everywhere, DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. It occurs 24 to 72 hours after exercise, and it's very common in an athletic setting. There are two leading theories as to what causes it. First, the theory that there is micro trauma that's occurring at the Z line of the sarcomere inside the muscle fiber. The second is a pH change in muscles while working out. Our muscles are designed to work in a narrow pH range. We create lactic and pyruvic acids in our muscles by consuming up all the muscle glycogen. The acids make the internal pH drop. As the pH drops, that's the muscle feeling more and more fatigued. Once the pH drops below 6.5, the muscle is not able to function. Now, our bodies, we are designed to self-regulate our pH, but by grabbing that acid and taking it out during strenuous exercise. But the carbon dioxide and both acids that are produced faster than our body is able to effectively buffer. We have a lot of different types of workouts that our guys adapt to, in season, out of season. Both have their separate demands. I find for the most part, our guys are the most sore after games. Now, the contact has a lot to do with it, but also the intensity of the exercise that they're achieving during the game is compared to none other. We also have a pretty intense conditioning test that all of our guys have to pass, and that causes a lot of soreness amongst their ranks as well. It's repetitive 150s, shuttle style, and the time varies based on the position, but it's pretty grueling. So, there's the quick and dirty about inflammation and fatigue. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. I think interdisciplinary education, strength coaches, dietitians, athletic trainers getting together is great, and it needs to be the standard of sports health. My social media, email, website for my nonprofit, all that's on the last side. So I encourage you to ask questions here tonight, but also lock in and click with me if you want to continue the conversation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Patrick to introduce Eric.
Yeah, we're cruising here. Eric's up next. We've been working with him for over 2 years, and really excited to hear about some of the stuff he's doing with technology with regards to the intensity, exertion, and recovery. So, Eric, go ahead, bud.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, so I'm Eric Renahan. I'm actually, as of Monday, I will be stepping down from the St. Louis Blues. So that's my official last day with the Blues. So I'm going to be sharing my experiences over the last 2 years using the PR lotion and how it fits into our model. So Colin and Brittany did a great job talking about the science of bicarbonate. You know, in hockey, traditionally, a lot of our guys have dabbled with bicarb. Some of them, you know, taken Stimastam, Alka-Seltzer, mixed with other types of electrolytes. And the issue with that oral supplementation, as they've talked about, is the GI distress that the athletes deal with. So for us, we've been very fortunate in the Blues organization to have the resources that we need to supply our athletes with everything that they need to perform. Our athletic therapists have done a great job. And again, working with them, we've been able to find ways to give our athletes what they need. Now, one of the things that really was interesting to me when I started looking at this, met Patrick, was the topical ability for these athletes to utilize bicarbonate in a way that was not going to create that GI distress, but was a way that these guys can use it in training, pre-game and post-game. And so for me, going into performance, it was really geared around recovery and understanding what our athletes needed to do to recover better, but maintain the loads that we were asking them to be a part of in the training sessions. So, you know, when we talk about how this is going to affect performance, it's really important for us to understand that we walk a fine line with the breakdown of speed, strength, and performance, especially in season in the NHL. And so while we go through our schedule, we plan out what those sessions are going to look like, how we're going to ask our athletes to recover, how our athletes are going to prepare for games. And so when we go through our schedule, it's really important to understand what our travel looks like. We play a very game-oriented schedule. The majority of our load and stress is game-related. We play a very dense 82-game schedule in the NHL. And every night, our best players need to be in the lineup. The parity in the NHL right now is that there's probably 25 to 26 teams that have a legitimate chance at competing for the Stanley Cup. And for us to be a team that can compete for the Stanley Cup, it really requires our best athletes to play every night. So for us to mitigate those effects of the travel schedule, the game schedule, and because our team is a team that practices regularly, we needed to mitigate the load from practices on the athletes as well. So we can shift to the next slide here. We'll talk about the schedule, and I want to go over kind of what that schedule looks like and how we plan that out. So if we take a look at the schedule here, let's go one more. You know, I gave you comparison here. So in November, we had 8 training exposures that we were planned out with our coaching staff. Those 8 work exposures or training exposures were scheduled for practice days. Early on in my career in the NHL, I shifted my mindset to I prioritize recovery and regeneration post-game. When I first got into the NHL, there was a lot of post-game training that was going on, and what was happening was these athletes were going home, they were playing a game, training, and then going home and trying to sleep. So early on in my career, I shifted the mindset to prioritize recovery and regeneration, and use practice days as our training stimulus. Not only did it provide training stimulus the day after games, but it also acted as a warm for practice days. So as we look through the schedule here, we had 8 training exposures. We had 13 flights, 3 travel days in the month. So we didn't do anything but travel on those days. We had 15 games in 30 days and 4 sets of back-to-back games in that month. And then we had 4 CBA mandated days off. So we had a total of 7 days off where there was no activity for the athletes. If we look at that schedule here, the blue are home games and the gray are road games. So in November, we had a pretty dense month of games. So we really had to plan out ahead of time how we were going to get those training exposures and how we were going to fit the utilization of the lotion into that schedule. Go down to the bottom here, we'll look at February. We, again, had 8 training exposures, 10 flights. We played more home games that month. We had 2 travel days only. So we had a total of 6 total days off, and we had 15 games in 29 days. So as we looked at that schedule, we really had to figure out ways to mitigate the rate of decay for strength and speed for our athletes. So prioritizing our training, making sure that we were counterbalancing the effects of the games, because we did have a very dense schedule in those months, but also making sure that we were offsetting the load that our athletes were going to experience in practice. And so we had to make sure that all of that was planned out with the coaching staff and fit into what the demands were for the athletes. So the way we do that is by utilizing 4 KPI clusters. For us, again, we've been very fortunate to have the resources to utilize certain technologies and to be able to integrate this into what we were doing with our athletes. So we were using dual force plates to look at mechanical loading and monitoring our program and the effectiveness of our programming for our athletes. We looked at heart rate monitoring from the metabolic side. That was used for on ice work and giving the coaching staff feedback on what the training effect was for the athletes. It also helped us with creating prescription for the athletes for some of the metabolic components to offset what was going on in practice. And then we looked at some pressure mapping to create stride profiling for athletes from the skill perspective, and then biomarker analysis to understand what was going on with the athletes from a health perspective. So those 4 KPI clusters is where we utilized the PR lotion to better understand how we can individualize our prescriptions from the training perspective, the mechanical perspective, the skill perspective, and then from the health perspective or the supplementation perspective. So we can go on to the next slide here, and I'll talk a little bit about how that program worked. When we look at what our coaches have planned for the day, we want to make sure that our athletes were prepared to tolerate the loads. So giving them insights into how we can prepare for the load in the gym or off ice, as well as what the athlete was going to experience on ice, and then give them strategies for recovery so that they were ready for the game the next day or ready for the next day's practice. So we wanted to make sure that they understood that if they were using this PR lotion, it wasn't just on game days. It wasn't just for preparing themselves for a game, but it was also to recover from the load the day before. So again, reducing DOMs, increasing their work tolerance, and reducing that skill degradation for us were the 3 main points that we addressed with our athletes. So for the programming, again, we wanted to offset what was happening with the practice loads. So on this day here, we knew ahead of time that the team was going to be working on special teams. This athlete here in particular is a defenseman, so knowing what we were going to expect from the metabolic work and what the schedule was from the coaching staff, we understood that there was probably going to be a pretty high aerobic response, or training effect was going to be high for that athlete. So what we wanted to work on with them was improving this athlete's force production, because we knew what the need was of this athlete from the mechanical assessments on the force plates. So we knew that this athlete needs more force production. We wanted to work on his acceleration and then offset the volume of aerobic work on the ice. So for that day, we worked on creating some acceleration. We worked on creating some transfer force ability with that athlete. And then we shifted into preparing them for the practice load. So if we go into that next slide, we can kind of go over what we experienced from the practice load that day. So we knew from the historical data that we were going to see pretty high aerobic response with that athlete. What we did with this data was we created a catalog or a database of the drills and the training effect on the different positional groups within our with our team, and we're able to understand what was going to happen potentially with the group when it was special teams, if they were in the forward group, if the goalies were being worked, or what was going to happen to the defenseman. And again, this particular athlete was a defenseman, so we saw a very high aerobic response. We saw a training effect that we knew was going to be an improving training effect, not overreaching, but we wanted to make sure that he was prepared for that. So again, to counterbalance the demands of not only the schedule, but for the practice loads are key for us. And as we went through this, the usage of the PR lotion, we really found that the athletes had a good response, especially the next day. The feedback that we were getting from the athletes was that they felt fresher, their legs felt lighter, and they were able to really feel like they can train hard before practice the next day, but also before games, they felt that they were more ready, that they had more get up and go, or they had more jam to their game. So those were the big things for us, was that the athletes were feeling better, and that they were able to engage in what we were asking them to do, not only pre-game, but on training days and practice days as well. So again, our biggest focus was reducing DOMs, reducing that swelling, and really creating that ability for them to reduce the skill degradation and improve their trainability during the practice days and be ready for the next day's game.
Well, I appreciate it, everybody. Thank you. I think starting off, I think one of the things that's really interesting to me is looking at that list of 5 things that Brittany touched on, that the IOC looks at, like caffeine. Everybody's pretty aware of. There's some consistent literature around that. We know about it. Creatine, same type of thing. Nitrate, seems like everybody's using some version of beetroot powder at this point. But with sodium bicarbonate not being as known, or beta-alanine not as known, I think it's a really interesting space to explore. Brittany, one of the questions that we got that popped up was around like polyphenols, right? And so that's the tart cherry juice. And so if that's helping like inflammation, like what are, I guess the bigger question is, right, like what's the real difference between the two? And then, how might the effect be compounded together, or how might it be different? Love to get your insight there.
Yes. So I think those two are different. So like with sodium bicarbonate, when we look at that, like what that's doing, like we described, is like helping combat the muscle fatigue that can happen during high intensity exercise. So that's going to be used for like during exercise, right? So it's like timing. It just has a different purpose. So that's what sodium bicarb is ideally going to help with. And then when we look at like polyphenols, so polyphenols are just like plant compounds that are found in like fruit and different stuff. So when we look at like cherry juice, like you mentioned, that's a very concentrated source of polyphenols. And all those different, and polyphenols is an antioxidant. So antioxidants are helpful in decreasing inflammation, which can help with muscle recovery. So that would be for after exercise kind of thing, for helping muscle recovery. So there would just be used, I think, at different times for sure. And then kind of the purpose of them is a little bit different. So I would say depending on the athlete and what, again, their sport position, the time of year, there are some athletes that could definitely benefit from both, whereas others might be, one might benefit more than the other, but they're not like competing products, if that makes sense.
Got it. Colin, we've got a quick question here with regards to rehab and soreness. The question is, in the NFL, when you're rehabbing an athlete, how do they progress effectively given soreness? I guess maybe the better way to frame that is like when you're working with an athlete, like, do you lose days to soreness where you would try to help them get better, but can't because, let's face it, that the guy is just too sore?
The answer I'd like to say is no, we don't lose any days because we plan our rehab and we plan our lifting, we plan our practice and what they're doing accordingly. But of course we do. At the top of every single rehab sheet that I write, it says RPE. So at the beginning of the rehab session, the very start of it, I go over the RPE with the athlete, kind of what we're looking for, and tell him, hey, this is not a report card on how I'm doing. This is helping me decide what's going on throughout the day. So if a guy comes in and says, hey, I'm super sore, we deadlifted 2 days ago, so my legs are shot. You have to adjust to what the athlete feels. And you have to always have tools in your toolkit to help with that soreness. Now, sometimes you plan for it and there's going to be days where they're super sore and you push them through anyway, depending on the phase of their rehab. But you always got to be able to address it. And lotions, topicals, meetings with the dietitian, meeting with the strength coach. Those are all the main tools that I use to kind of balance and go. But it's about communication. So if the dietitian knows that a guy has a heavy squat day coming up or a heavy lift day coming up, they can supplement. If the strength and conditioning coach knows that, hey, in the athletic training room, Colin's really going to work the hamstrings today, they can supplement as well. So that communication really helps decrease the amount of soreness and days lost in rehab. At the bottom of my rehab sheet, it says sleep, hydration, nutrition. So they know at the very beginning, I want to know how they feel. They know what they're going to do. And at the end, they know they need to sleep. They know they need to hydrate. They know they need to have correct nutrition.
Got it. Erica, I've got a question for you from the Q&A down here. The intensity in hockey is super high all the time. You're going out as hard as you can. The question here is, how do you train for that level of intensity more effectively? But then what are some of the recovery strategies that you've used between those training sessions in the off season?
Yeah. I mean, there's multiple aspects to hockey, obviously, that the athletes need to be able to excel and to perform. So from the training side, we need to be able to understand what the individual need is of that athlete, what the key performance indicators are for the position. So we look at those two things, specifically how we can make that athlete more efficient. In season, it's really about mitigating the loss of strength. In the off season, we have a better ability to focus on some of the qualities that they may be weaker at. So in season, really, what we're prioritizing is their biggest strength. We want to try to reduce that decay as much as we can. So what we're trying to do essentially is understand where we can prioritize our prescription, make sure that prescription is what the athlete needs. And then really to counter, like I said earlier, to counterbalance what's going on in terms of the load that they're experiencing in games, right? Because our season, again, is really where we, from the game side of the season, is where we get the most of our load and stress on our athletes. So we want to try to counterbalance that while mitigating that loss of strength. So in season, the prescriptions are very directed. Off season, again, is where we can spend more time. Our athletic therapists are there in the off season where they can work with the injured athletes, work with athletes on some of the things that are more health related, and we can work more on some of the areas that are, I guess, what we call their weaknesses. But in season, it's really directed, and again, that's where we try to find those training exposures or those work exposures and really fit that into the schedule. And I think that we found better benefit by doing that on practice days. And post game, we were able to prioritize soft tissue work, prioritize nutrition, prioritize rehydration, prioritize the use of PR lotions, zinc, magnesium, all of those different things that often got skipped because we were trying to get training sessions in post game. So those are the things that we really try to do. And that's where we were able to prioritize some of those regeneration techniques is in the post game window that we had with our athletes. And again, I think that's in season. It's a little bit more challenging depending on when you're on the road versus at home. On the road, as soon as the game's over, we're often right on the plane and out of there to the next city. At home, we definitely have more time to spend with the athletes. But I guess, the long answer to that question was post game. Those modalities is where we were really able to see the big benefit from that.
Awesome. Brittany, I've got a question here with regards to beta-alanine. You had mentioned the skin tingle. Do you know what that comes from?
Don't know what that comes from.
Sorry to put you on the
Yeah, I don't know.
spot.
I don't know why that would do that. I don't know.
Yeah, I have no clue either. So
Colin, do you know?
I don't know, but that's how you know it works. You take the beta-alanine, the pre-workout, you get that face tingle. That's what I'm looking for, right?
With regards to training and intensity, and I'll throw this out to all three of you. You know, what are some of? Have you tried? Like, what products have you tried in the last year and a half or so that have helped with the performance of your athletes? It could be anything.
From a training mentality from our end, so our big things are recovery. Our big things are treating injuries. We have seen great success with the compressive therapies, the Normatex, the recovery pumps. We use a product called Mark Pro, which is an eStim device for recovery as well. We have athletes using the PR lotion, and it's kind of gone around the locker room a little bit. Guys promoting it, guys talking about, hey, it works, guys coming from other teams that use it. That's been a big success in recovery. But I think the best thing that we've found is honestly educating the athletes on their body, educating the athletes on the importance of the three aspects that we have right now, all the kind of facets, not just saying, hey, get a massage, but timing the massage correctly, using the catapult data that we find and the RPE data and tailoring the recovery to the actual information versus just saying, hey, massage is available, ART is available. That's where we found success.
Great, Eric.
Yeah, I think, a similar answer to Colin. I think for us, it was about consistency in whatever we were doing. Communication, obviously, for us, and getting the athletes to understand the why behind what we were asking them to do. But more so the consistency. The more we were on them, whether it was getting treated pre-game, soft tissue pre-game, or getting treated post-game, how they were modifying their warm-ups based off of their individual needs. All of those different things, I think it really came down to consistency. The more consistent the athletes were, the more consistent we were with our messaging and our communication, the better the results were. And, for us, all of our guys have a different routine. All of our guys take different things, use different supplements, have different warm-ups. But again, the better we were at being consistent, the better they were. And I think that's where we saw our biggest results.
Brittany, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I would just agree with that. I think from my standpoint of getting athletes to be consistent with particularly their nutrition, first and foremost, of making sure they are fueling appropriately, they're recovering consistently. And I think it's with, like Eric was talking about, the travel schedule, particularly on the professional level, it's just challenging because they're like during season, they travel so much. Like if it's, hockey, basketball, that kind of thing, their schedules are hectic and it's hard to find, their schedules aren't consistent. So it's hard to get into a consistent routine. So I always just push that. And then like Eric said too, they all have kind of different things, but trying to, if there is a certain thing that's going to help one guy, trying to help or girl, help them with that and teaching them why of how it's going to be beneficial kind of thing. So I would say just echoing both of what they said as well.
Got it. I've got a question here in the Q&A for Brittany. If there was one thing that a small college could add to benefit their athletes the best post-game, what would it be in your mind?
If you're starting small, I mean, if it's something just for recovery, depending if it's a small college, your budget is probably small. So even going with honestly, a chocolate milk, I mean, that's cost effective. It provides carbohydrate, protein, fluids, and other essential nutrients. So I mean, that's honestly a good one that's going to be pretty cost effective.
Got it. Eric, same question. Post game, what's like the one go-to thing that really you think has most bang for the buck, especially given your 82 game travel schedule?
Yeah, I mean, the most bang for our buck, I think it was probably protein, and zinc, magnesium. I think those were probably, for the cost and the accessibility, and I think those are probably our two biggest bang for our buck items. You know, most of the time our athletes aren't getting enough protein. They're not getting enough of that in their diet, and especially when we're on the road, it's hard to manage that. So I think, you know, if I was to give them one thing, that would be, you know, number one right away.
Okay. And Colin, same question. Like, your guys get off the gridiron, teams beat up. Obviously, football is a contact sport. You know, what would be the one thing that, if that was the only thing you could do with your athletes, what would that be?
If there was one thing, it would be send them straight to bed, let them get a good night's rest.
Got it. Got it. Got another question here. Jeff, I hope that answers your question, by the way. Eric, how would you adjust supplementation based on the varying metabolic or nutritional profiling data points? Likewise, how would you adjust post-rehab and treatment for more anaerobic or aerobic days?
Yeah, so I think where we were able to get really granular with that was on some of the inflammatory markers, C-reactive protein in particular, and vitamin D. I think those were two of the bigger variables that we were able to control for. So with that, you know, through managing curcumin intake, omega intake, vitamin D, giving the right prescription of vitamin D, I think we were able to get really strong effect that way. I think having an understanding of what that prescription needed to be was important for us. We didn't want to just say, take 10,000 IUs of vitamin D or take 5,000 IUs of vitamin D and give that to everybody. It was really important to start to understand more specifically what the individual response was. So I think that C-reactive protein and vitamin D biomarker, those two are kind of the biggest ones we were able to impact. And through the training process, you know, I think both of those were really impactful, not only for the injured athletes, but for the healthy athletes as well, just mitigating some of that that soreness, that fatigue, and some of the, because we're an indoor sport and we play in the winter, you know, we don't often see the sun. So making sure that the athletes were exposed to some of that vitamin D just in general was important as well.
Gotcha. Brittany, this one's for you. What do you think is the ideal amount of protein that your athletes should be taking?
I mean, that's going to vary on the kind of like those individual goals and the training load, but I mean, it's going to be anywhere from, I mean, most likely 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. It can be higher, but I would say most athletes are going to fall within that. Got it.
And is there a timing of that protein? Is that before a workout, after a workout, before you go to bed? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the timing is important, but that's going to be, so that that range is going to be for your daily protein. So then that's where, like, I would look at the kind of that athlete schedule and kind of see when they can get it in. I mean, ideally we are kind of spacing it out and getting it consistently throughout the day. So they're not skipping breakfast, having a granola bar for lunch, and then like eating 2 steaks for dinner kind of thing. They are spacing it out consistently throughout the day. And then depending on when their training sessions are, we can, you know, make sure we are getting an appropriate amount post-workout, whether that be in a snack and or meal kind of thing. So it's really dependent, I would say, on the athlete's schedule and how it's spaced out throughout the day. But again, ideally we are getting it in every meal and getting it appropriately throughout the day around training sessions.
Got it. It makes a ton of sense. Colin, you know, when you're introducing something new to your athletes, you know, you're dealing with pros that are making millions of dollars a year. How do you introduce them to something that's new, that they might not fully grasp, understand, or may not just be perfect, right? Like, how do you introduce that to them?
First, every single modality we use, every single product we use, every single thing we do has a specific reason and a specific physiological effect that we want to get. So if you're doing an exercise, it needs to be done a very correct and specific way to get the desired effect. If you're using a product, it needs to be used a very specific way to get the desired effect. So everything we do is based on that desired outcome that we have. So if we have a new product that we really think is going to produce this physiological effect that we want, we have no problem using it and introducing it to the athlete. Now, at our level, And I'll say, in the Big Ten, it took a lot of education. The athletes nowadays want to know what they're putting in their body, what's going on, and they're a little bit more aware. Not all of them, some of them don't care. But for the most part, they want to know what they're putting in their body. They want to know what's going on and what the effect's going to be. So as long as you have that trust level with the athlete that I think athletic trainers are on the forefront of, they know that you're not going to put them in harm's way. They know that you're not just kind of shooting at the wall to figure it out. They know that it's a thoughtful process. That's the best way to implement new things. Now, you're also going to have to educate the agents at times. You're also going to have to educate the coaches at times. And there's really no way around it. So if you're BSing or if you don't have the right intentions or all the information, it's going to be exposed. So you have to have great knowledge of what you're introducing. You have to have a belief in the product, and you have to have the trust level with the athlete.
That's great. We're getting a bunch of questions on here about vitamin D. The first one here is, Eric, are you including vitamin K2 with your D supplementation?
Yep.
Yeah, that's the quick and dirty of it. Yeah. Brittany, for those that don't know, would you mind giving us a little bit of background on vitamin D?
Oh man, I mean, vitamin D is involved in over 1,000 of the reactions in the body. I mean, so it is a crucial part of just so many different physiological processes that are going to benefit the athlete. So especially if they're deficient, I mean, and the risk factor, like Eric was saying, if you practice inside, or if you, there's certain risk factors that can give you a higher risk of being deficient. So, and like I was mentioning earlier, depending on how deficient an athlete is, that's going to dictate the amount of supplementation they need to be taking, because that's one that you can up the dosage pretty significantly for a while to get the levels up. So that's going to be kind of dependent too on how much they need based on what their current levels are.
Got it. And then I've got another question for you here, Brittany. Have you ever tried sodium bicarbonate taken orally?
I actually never have, but I will now after this.
Have you guys, Eric, you mentioned PR lotion, and obviously that's one of the products that Amp Human makes. Have any of you, Brittany or Colin, played with other buffering products in your own use or in your own practice?
I mean, I've used Beta-Alanine, but I mean, essentially those are the only two that I've ever tried them on myself. I know our athletes in the past have tried lots of different things, including different forms and ways of ingesting bicarbonate. And again, like Colin and Brittany talked about, the GI distress often was problematic. The other problem too is that the routine, the strategy that the athletes have to take to actually ingest it without getting that GI distress and potentially to get the effectiveness in order, in time for that competition, is pretty invasive. So I think those are some of the things that I never really kind of wanted to experiment with myself. So I really just only stuck to those two personally.
So I've used the sodium bicarb and Beta-Alanine, of course, the face tingle, like I said. The bicarb for me, we have a lot of guys that have very interesting diets and nerves and things like that add to kind of an upset stomach issue. And to me, the added sodium bicarb to it just didn't attest to a really good gut reaction. So those taken orally were kind of shied away from for me. That's why I think that the PR lotion is a good buffer in between, because you get the positive effects, but you don't get that, I call it pregame gut, but I'm sure there's a better term for it. GI distress.
There you go. Well, I think that covers the questions that we've gotten here. Colin, thank you very much. Brittany, thank you. Very much appreciate it. And Eric, thank you as well for your time. Have a great evening, everybody.